So, and if I miss anything, please let me know. So, you are the West Asia Regional Director at Youth for Nature, and you are also the Regional Youth Focal Point for the Middle East and North Africa in support of the UN Food Systems Summit 2021. You are a National Coordinator for the Global Youth Biodiversity Network and a Youth Ambassador for Real Food Systems. And your work, Rayan's work centers around youth mobilization and engagement in West Asia on climate action, food systems, and nature-based solutions. Did I get everything?
100%.
Okay, great.
You got everything.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and so I wanted to start off first with defining a few things for those who are watching. And a lot of your work on climate action, as I mentioned, is focused around food and nature, which go hand in hand with each other. And so I wanted to understand how you would define what a sustainable food system is and what a sustainable diet is and what that looks like in practice.
Yeah, sure. All right, just to start off by saying that a sustainable food system and a sustainable diet are both sustainable for human health and for the health of the planet or the environment. And it's a perfect combination in the sense that the diet that we choose that's good for our health is at the same time a diet that's good for the environment. So let me just start off by defining a few things that we call planetary boundaries, which are what's sustainable for the environment. So we need to be respecting climate change. That is a diet that's low in greenhouse gas emissions, land system change, freshwater use, and nitrogen and phosphorus cycling, which is soil health. And last is biodiversity loss. So a food system that considers these boundaries, all of them, is considered a sustainable food system for the environment. And sort of a food system is defined from feed to fork, right? So it's from food production all the way to consumption. And what you decide to consume affects what we decide to produce at the same time. So when we talk about sustainable production, it's mainly focusing on things like minimizing food loss, decarbonizing the transport system. We're talking about organic production, that is minimizing the use of herbicides and pesticides, and applying agroforestry and other nature-based solutions, and sort of avoiding monocultural food production, and focusing also on local and seasonal production. I'm always really fascinated by why everybody on the planet wants to eat the same food everywhere. And I always give that example of avocados. Sort of everybody on the planet wants to have avocados. You just can't do that if we want to talk about a sustainable food system. And last is avoiding industrialized production. And we see a lot of, in the US, we have a lot of animal industrial production, which is really bad for the environment. And sort of then we switch to processing food, and then we switch to food consumption. And so when we talk about sustainable consumption, it's mainly minimizing food waste. But also here I come back to what we choose to eat dictates what we choose to produce. And sort of if we choose foods that are sustainable for our health and the environment, then we can produce food that is sustainable for our health and the environment. People want to do what's easy, but very often what's easy is what's difficult, and what's difficult is what's easy. What do I mean by that is that we can maximize efficiency in the food production sector as much as we want, freshwater use, everything. But the easy way is to change what we decide to eat. So instead of having a beef burger, having some lentils does way more than maximizing efficiency in the food production. So sort of to say, how does a sustainable diet look like in practical terms? That means a diet that's high in plant-based protein versus animal-based protein. It's a diet that's high in plant-based sources of fat versus animal sources of fat. So we're talking about olive oil, avocado oil versus ghee, butter, lard, and all of these things. And it's also high in fruits, vegetables, pulses, nuts, seeds, oil crops. But it's also low in sugar, especially processed sugar, alcohol, and it should have adequate amounts of calories, because if we're consuming more calories than we need, that's not good for our health, but it's also not good for the environment because we're producing more than we need.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my answer.
No, there's a lot of elements that go into a sustainable food system, and I think we made a really good point that like one of the easiest things you can do is change how you decide to eat, and it's sort of a classic. It's just supply and demand. If we change the demand, then the supply will change, and it'll have ripple effects on how the environment is being impacted, basically.
100%. That's the new paradigm shift, I'd say, in modern times, is to stop focusing so much on the production, focus on people's, behaviors and their choice of consumption.
Yeah, and whether or not you agree with, capitalism or the way the society is set up in different countries, you have to face reality. Businesses who are the ones producing this food will respond to what will make them the most money, and it's just
100%.
that's the reality. And so looking at diet and its ties to the environment has become more mainstream in recent years. Obviously, it's been a focus of study for many, many years, but it's sort of been in the public consciousness. It's become trendy and all those things. And I know you've done research on the topic of diets, specifically looking at Denmark as a case study and the ties between food choices and water consumption, which you also just mentioned in your explanation previously. So can you explain your findings on the study and why a plant-based diet is so highly encouraged in terms of water consumption?
Sure. So the study was done in Denmark, and it took a duration, or it was published this year, but we considered a period of 5 years. So we looked at how the Danes consumed food, and we averaged the quantity of consumption per food product, sort of meat, dairy, sugar, alcohol, everything that the Danes consumed every year by quantity, and we averaged that over 5 years. And we saw how much the Danes ate in terms of quantities of each food product, and then we calculated the water footprint of that. And then our result was that, the Danes consumed around 2,651 liters per person per day. So just to put that in context, I think every household on average in general, I think is supplied around 100 to 200 liters per day for household stuff. So washing dishes, brushing your teeth, taking a shower. And the Danes consume almost 3,000 liters per day just by eating the diet that they choose to eat. So this is how much what you choose to eat affects how much water we consume. So, all that talking about, close the tap when you're brushing your teeth or stuff like that doesn't really count when you're taking the data into account when you look at food consumption.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of then we decided to compare that with another diet, which is the first ever diet recommendation for what's good for the planet, but also for human health. So there's a lot of diet recommendations for human health, but this is the first that considers the planet and human health, which is published by the Eat Lancet Commission. And so then we said, what if the Danes consumed this diet? How much water would they then consume? And that amounted to around 1,969 liters. So that's 26% less water if they switch from the typical Danish diet to that Eat diet. But sort of to explain to people what does it mean to switch from this diet to this diet, it's exactly what I mentioned in the first question. It's switching to plant-based proteins instead of animal-based proteins, switching to plant-based fats, and a diet that's high in fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. The recommendations are there. People can take a look at it. Mm-hmm. But sort of then we also used insects. We said, what if we keep the two diets, but we substitute all the meat by insects? What would happen by then? The water consumption didn't really change much. It only decreased of about 4% for the Danish diet. So it turns out that specific insect type still had quite a high water footprint. So in general conclusion, and I forgot to mention that coffee was a big was a big factor in the water consumption of the Danes. So that being said, there's still no world consensus on the recommendation of coffee per day. No one knows the recommendation for that. So we couldn't decrease that. We kept that the same. Had we decreased the amount of coffee consumption, that would have decreased. But also to say that most of the water on the Danish diet was attributed to meat consumption, followed by stimulants, which is mainly coffee, and then dairy products. So yeah, that was it.
Yeah, and it's very simple when you look at the conclusion of it. It's just, eat, and you don't even have to eat zero meat, just eat less meat would drastically mitigate the amount of water that's being consumed.
100%. Most diets, like the healthy recommendations, they don't say that you need to be vegan. They say that you're allowed to consume around, or you're recommended to consume around 500 grams of meat per week. So that's equivalent to 2 big burgers, which I think is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, which also, coming from the U.S. perspective, that's very meat heavy. It's very burger, steak heavy. It's not.
Yeah.
It's sort of become normalized to have meat every day for dinner or lunch and breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But that's not, just like taking a step back and looking at it. That's not normal just in any capacity. There's so much variety and diversity in what you can consume for your health that eating, like I'm not a vegan, but I have drastically reduced my meat consumption and my dairy consumption. And it's at first it actually takes a little getting used to, just because you're so conditioned that it's normal to eat that way. But you actually feel better, and you know that you're having a more positive impact on the environment, which is great. It's like a doubly good feeling.
100%. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one interesting part when I was reading your paper is the part about insects, and I just wanted to like ask that question because I know it's definitely interesting, and I know when I read it, my first reaction is, "Ooh, I would like eating insects." But there's a lot of studies. I mean, they are a source of protein. So I guess, do you think that and there are countries in the world that insects are a part of their diet. That's normal. Obviously, I'm coming from a perspective that is not normal at all. But do you think that would be like a realistic switch in the future, or like that more diets will start incorporating like insect protein into it?
All right. The thing is, there's a lot of research about alternative proteins. I've even read an article, I think, a month ago, which is extracting a type of protein between mangoes and pig blood, which is sort of the new alternative. There's a lot of alternative protein sources, and I'm not judging anyone for choosing whichever they want. I could speak from my experience. When I lived in Denmark, I had a friend who worked in a company where they produced juice from insects.
Oh, wow.
And I even worked for a company that produced chocolate bars using insects. And honestly, I had a try. And when you try it, when it's embedded in like a burger or a chocolate or something, you don't really feel any different taste. You just feel the taste of the other ingredients and not the insects. But were you to to consume it directly with soy sauce, for example, like some cultures do it, yeah, okay, then you would be eating the legs and the like the hands. But just sort of to finish off, eating insects, like edible insects, has been it's been there before we even started to eat meat. So it's been there for thousands of years in non-Western societies. So it's popular in some parts of the world, but it's not popular in other parts of the world. And I feel, I like what I remember is that I read a survey that like it mentioned to people, like it compared eating a normal beef burger versus a burger that had insects in it, and they couldn't really realize the difference. So it might be it might be tasty to some people in the future. I have no clue.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, people are comfortable eating crab or eating shrimp that has a lot of little legs on it. And so it's all just sort
Yeah.
of like, it's a mental thing. You're sort of conditioned to think insects gross, fish okay, or like prawns or whatever. I think there has to be sort of like a socially conscious shift in that direction.
And
I
people
would
need
definitely,
time. Yeah,
yeah. It will definitely take time. I would try a
100%.
chocolate bar with bugs in it. I would do it.
All right, cool.
You can send me the recommendation of which one to try.
100%.
And another part of your paper about water is I feel like for someone who's not familiar with the concept of how much water goes into producing an ounce of meat, for example, that might sound, oh my god, almost 3,000 liters. How is that even possible? Could you talk about the concept of virtual water and what that means when calculating the amount of water that goes into producing food that we end up consuming?
100%. One time when I was presenting my research at a conference in Sweden, um, a professor from Denmark asked me at the end of my presentation, why do we care about the water consumption of the Danish diet? Because Denmark is very water rich. It's a very water rich country, and Scandinavian countries in general are water rich. So why do we care how much water we're producing since we don't really suffer from any water scarcity issues? And hence the concept of virtual water. So just sort of to define what is virtual water, it's, or what people also call embedded water, it's the water used in the production process of an agricultural or industrial product. So sort of to give an example of what that means, to produce 1 kilogram of grain, let's say barley, all right, that needs around 1,000 to 2,000 kilos of water. So for you to consume 1 kilogram of barley, you need to also use 1,000 kilos of water. And that 1,000 kilos of water used to produce 1 kilogram of grain is what is called virtual water. So it's the water embedded in the grain. It's the water that was used to grow 1 kilo of water. And that is also accounted for you because you chose to eat that 1 kilo. So you also chose that whoever is producing the food also uses 1,000 kilos of water. Another example is, for example, if we're accounting the virtual water of beef, it's not only what the cow drinks, it's what the cow eats, what the cow drinks, and also the water that is involved in the slaughtering process and the other processes that happen. So when you add these three together, it's the virtual water needed to produce 1 kilogram of beef. And most of that water is allocated to the feed that the cow, and not the water that the cow drinks. It doesn't drink that much water, but it requires a lot of feed, and the amount of water is allocated for that. So to come back to why is this important in Denmark, for example, Denmark, like any other country, doesn't produce all of its food. Denmark doesn't produce its coffee, doesn't produce its cacao beans, it doesn't produce its soybeans, its bananas, whatever, all of these. So these food products in Denmark being consumed in Denmark are produced elsewhere around the world, and they're being consumed in Denmark through importing these food products from Brazil, Argentina, and other countries around the world. So what the Danish consumer is deciding to eat in Denmark is affecting the water consumption in other countries. And sort of, there's a direct responsibility of Western countries choosing to, eat these diets that are very high in water consumption are affecting countries like Brazil and Argentina, where they do suffer from water scarcity. They do suffer from an inefficient water irrigation system and other problems. So it's sort of showing the consumer that what you're deciding to eat in your country affects people and livelihoods and resources in other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings me to a point that I know we talked about briefly the last time we spoke. But there is a Euro-Western centric in when talking about food justice. And even just that guy at the conference say, "Oh, why does Denmark need to care about this?" Well, that's very selfish to say, especially as you just mentioned. You know, you're importing all of these foods from most of the time all these tropical fruits like cacao beans, bananas from countries that don't have the best infrastructure. for a variety of reasons. And so not taking that into account and saying, oh, we're doing a good job is completely disregarding a whole other side of the food chain, so to speak. And so I wanted to ask you, what does food justice look like in the Middle East? Because obviously you're in the Middle East and a lot of your work centers around the Middle East. And given this sort of Euro-Western centric take on food justice and food sovereignty and all these environmental issues, what do you think needs to be done to change that mindset? And how, like, what does that look like for you?
I was actually contacted by someone today over LinkedIn asking that, hey, people are complaining in Brazil because Lebanon's importing meat from Brazil that's, contributing to the Amazon deforestation and other things. So that's also one thing for consumers here to be aware of, that in terms of food justice to other societies. But in the Middle East, to speak specifically about the Middle East, food justice is centered around other issues and not consumer, like people choosing what to consume. It's sort of, there's food security here, there's a lot of water scarcity, and there's a lot of inefficiency in water production. But the main issue is all of these political, economic tensions that are happening that are leading to, big malnutrition, for example, in Yemen or in Syria. And I believe that on a regional perspective, that's our biggest problem, being able to separate the food system from the political and economic tensions, because despite what different political parties are disagreeing on, the people, the citizens, shouldn't be the people who are suffering from that. So if there is a sanction and economic sanctions on things, for example, putting a higher tax on imports of certain food products, there's also affecting consumers, because the prices are increasing and sort of they can't afford what what they used to be able to afford. So I think it's that ability to separate the food system from economic and political tensions. That's what's really important in the Middle East, because we're suffering from people who have malnutrition, no access to food, even no access to water because of these tensions. So yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, citizens shouldn't be used as pawns in a political game, especially no matter what side
100%.
of the political spectrum you're on, everyone needs to eat and everyone deserves access to food. They deserve food security and access to water. It's a basic human right.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly the case here.
Mm. And it's interesting that you said you got a message about Lebanon importing meat from Brazil that people are saying are contributing to deforestation of the Amazon. And, it's just interesting to think in like being a conscious consumer is there's so many levels to it, and it's not so easy to say, and it's also very one-sided to say, oh, just eat more grains or eat more vegetables, be more plant-based, when that's not easily accessible for people. There's limited access to these things, to water even. So taking into account what you are able to do in your situation and not necessarily expecting the exact same response from people in various parts of the world, I think is important to keep in mind.
Exactly, because what we're also like having difficulty here as youth from the Middle East, or especially in Lebanon, is sending that global message now, hey, shift to more plant-based diets. But as you mentioned, people don't have access to all sort of foods, so they will take what they have, and sort of it's not very it's not very adequate to be telling people to on one type of food when they might not even have access to it.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of your work revolves around the youth. You work for Youth for Nature, the UN Group for Children and Youth, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and you're a youth ambassador for Real Food Systems. What is so important about engaging the youth? What difference does it make in the fight for a more sustainable food system and a healthier planet?
100%. This is the question of all international events being asked to youth all the time. And, it's the same answer every youth answers. Youth are the future. And they're going to be bearing the burdens of the emergency crisis happening due to the climate and other things. Also, what I believe is that youth are the category in society that are able to lead change. They're more open to change their behaviors, to change their consumption patterns, and you always see that happening through youth. And I believe it's just because they're still not grounded in the system. Uh, you know, like they have that passion, that will to change, to try new things, to challenge themselves to do better. And that's why this generation or the youth have to be more conscious of their choices, because if we continue being unconscious of all of the economic systems happening around the world, especially with the food systems, we will raise a generation that will continue to do what the previous generations did due to capitalism and other things. So youth should be conscious of the whole process leading to their consumption, and not just the final product and how much money they make and their ability to buy that product, but they should be aware of the entire process.
Do you think, or do you have any advice for the youth? That's the very broad group of the youth who may feel that there's not much that they can do. That there's a term like eco anxiety, right? Where it's just so crippling, that fear of, oh my God, it's so much bigger than me. How can I possibly make any difference?
I mean, honestly, like when you introduced me at the beginning, people can see how many youth networks I'm involved in, and every time I go into a new network of youth, you see the amazing ability that youth have and the political power they're gaining in changing decisions at a national or international level, whether that is through real food systems, Youth for Nature, Gibbon, and even like the UN system. Like now the UN is taking youth, like the youth perspective, much more seriously. Like they're like this Saturday they're hosting the Youth Environment Assembly, which will be the biggest youth event on the planet per year. And so youth are, and like a lot of decision makers who are international or like at a national level are joining, whether they're ministers, presidents, or like working at the government. So they are listening to youth,
Mm-hmm.
um, but but they're not taking the bold actions that need to be taken, that youth are demanding. But we're starting somewhere. I know that we all have eco anxiety, and that the crisis is it's becoming worse and worse every day. But change is slow, and we need to speed it up. So the more youth there is, the more pressure we can do.
Yeah, there's power in numbers. Obviously,
Yeah,
one person by themselves, it's hard to imagine the change that you can impart. But when you get together in these organizations and these movements, I mean, we've seen it happen. It happens, but then sometimes I think what can be a bit numbing for people is it's two steps forward, one step back, but you're still always moving one step forward, and keeping that in mind, I think, is important. Um,
100%. Yeah.
And so you mentioned the UN, and I know the UN is having a food system summit. How is this? What is this summit about, and how is it different from other UN summits?
All right. So the UN Food System Summit is the first ever UN summit regarding food systems, and it's planned to be held this September 2021. But we still don't know if we'll go in person or it will be hybrid or whatever due to Corona. And it's been termed as the People's Summit. Anybody can join the discussions in the Food System Summit. There are 5 action tracks, and they have vice chairs and youth chairs even. And a lot of these youth chairs are involved in real food systems. So anybody can be a champion. There's like a champions network. There are youth networks. I'm involved in the regional youth focal points, and I'm responsible for the Middle East and North Africa. And sort of anybody can host an independent dialogue. So if you have a concern, a solution, a problem, you're a farmer, you're a chef, anybody, and you have a concern or a solution, or you'd like to talk about food issues, you can host your own independent dialogue and ask people at the Food System Summit to join and listen to you and exchange, ideas. So it's very inclusive. It's inclusive of youth, and everyone who are involved in the food systems, and anybody can be involved.
That's exciting. Also, because I feel like big organizations like the UN, they seem so unreachable, untouchable. And so making a people summit where everyone's voice can be heard, I think is really critical to advancing these causes.
100%, yeah. I mean, we still don't know what exactly is going to be happening at the Food Systems Summit, what kind of decisions will be made. But we really appreciate that, we have this space to express our needs, the solutions we have, the problems that there are there. So yeah, that's really great. Like in terms of a big UN summit, that we have that much leverage.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned real food systems, and I wanted to quickly discuss what does real food systems do in working towards a more sustainable plant-based future? What's it all about? How did it get started? And what does it mean to be a youth ambassador for them?
Yeah, so Real Food Systems was established by Marit Johansson. She also works at the UN, and Carly Schneider is our director. And sort of then we have the Youth Ambassadors Network. So there's a lot of youth at Real Food Systems. And what Real Food Systems stand for is addressing the planetary emergency through sustainable food systems as the number one solution to the climate crisis. So they acknowledge that 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions are because of the food systems, and a lot of other environmental issues are because of the food systems, and they're focused on solving that through mainly three ways. One is awareness, regarding food issues. Number two is behavior change, and number three is action on international and societal level. So there's the Food Systems Summit that some of the youth ambassadors at Real Food Systems have joined and are discussing different topics, and like other events that are happening, whether local or or whether it's in person or online. This is what Real Food Systems is doing.
That's great. That's a really great cause. Also, it seems so obvious, but it, like just to mention it, eating is like the one thing that you can say with eating and drinking is the one thing you can say with certainty everyone in the world does. Like there's not one person who doesn't do it. So in terms of building awareness on this, it's important because everyone can make a change in that, and that all those changes compound on top of each other when they're put together.
100%, yeah. And what also Real Food Systems is advocating for is also a plant-based diet. So but let me just tell people that a plant-based diet is a diet based on plants. So I don't want people to be confused with a vegan movement, or or being extreme or excluding of anything else. It's a diet that's based on plants.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get turned off by the messaging that or the perception of this messaging that happens of, oh, you're either all in or you're not doing enough to help. And that's very exclusive. It's very like exclusatory to people who then it kind of casts, I think, a bit of shame on people. And I don't think that you can accomplish anything when you're shaming people. I think shaming people is one of the worst things that you can do when you're trying to mobilize people for a movement to to heal the earth and heal people themselves.
Exactly. It's a very judgmental thing. I was vegan myself, and now I don't consider myself as vegan, but I do eat mostly plant-based. And, there was that shame, like, who can last longer regarding, no eggs, no dairy, no meat, no nothing. But, that's not the core of the problem, or like the core of the action. It's just shift to more plant-based products.
Yeah, it's also more realistic in terms of.
And there's like, yeah, and like there's like that colonial Western aspect to plant-based diets that's being pushed, that I also want to speak against, is having all that tofu and vegan burgers and vegan nuggets. everything is veganized, vegan pasta, vegan cheese, vegan cheddar. And so, that might be accessible in the Western world because there's like that high demand for vegan products, and companies are becoming innovative and creative, like regarding, but most of the world doesn't have access to those products, and their traditional food isn't based on all of these products. It's a great way to be more vegan if you'd like to shift, and you'd like that junk food section of the diet, but it should be more stressed that societies around the world should be advised to follow their traditional ways of eating, using plant-based sources. Like here in Lebanon, we're advised to eat more hummus, more lentils, all of our traditional vegan food, and sort of not to get confused with how I'm going to do a vegan cake or a vegan whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it also disregards the cultural aspect to it. Food is for your health, but food is also cultural. Like there's a whole cultural aspect of food that I think gets left out of the like Western American centric view of plant-based. Because America, we don't really have like a culture around food, so it's easy to just like have all these veganized like dishes, but we don't have like you're Lebanese, I'm Cypriot, right? Like they're just staple meals in our cultures that, we have a lot of plant-based things. There's also meat-based dishes that no one's going to stop eating them, but just advocating eating more of the lentils and the hummus and those sort of dishes. I think incorporating culture and keeping those traditions and not advising people to go against that, I think also will incorporate more individuals and more communities.
100%. Like you can veganize foods. Like for example, in Denmark, there's not a lot of fruits, vegetables, and nuts and seeds and lentils. So it's okay to veganize like a lot of the dishes that you eat. But also when you think about the food systems, um, like there's these farmers and like traditional restaurants and all of these, and they're losing when you shift to one sort of way of eating vegan. And what if nobody likes that way? Like we can be all going towards that direction. I think it's really important to talk about what people want to eat and how they want to eat it, because everything we talked about during this call, people won't take it seriously unless it's about them and how they decide to eat. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a personal element to it. Food is a very personal thing. People have personal relationships with what they eat and what you're putting into your body. And then just one other thing that I think is interesting is people a lot of times associate being vegan with being healthy, and that's not necessarily the case because you can have vegan butter, vegan cheese, but there's a lot of crap in it. It's not a whole like plant-based meal. You can be like a junk food vegan, and you're not helping anybody because those are all processed foods. And great, you're not eating dairy, meat, and eggs and whatever, but you're producing a lot of other crap that took more processes and a lot of water to produce itself.
I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, but also like some of the things that are very unhealthy for you are also vegan, and they include like foods that are highly processed, and they contain a lot of processed sugar and a lot of seed oils. So those things are vegan, but they're super unhealthy. And plus, put aside alcohol, having a sedentary life, bad sleeping habits. But I say again, I'm not a nutritionist or a lifestyle coach or anything.
Your next career move could be into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, just to wrap up the conversation, the important thing to keep in mind is moving toward helping the environment, and climate action takes a personal approach, and transitioning to more plant-based diet lifestyle can be very personal. It doesn't have to be one size fits all, and everyone working even a little bit can make a huge collective effort.
100%. I'd say the flexitarian way is what's really, winning the scene nowadays, because, people are a bit afraid of that plant base. So flexitarian is the way. Be more conscious of your food choices. Remember water consumption. don't have 10 coffee mugs a day unless you didn't sleep the night before. But you know what I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that term flexitarian. I have that's the first time I've heard that.
Okay, yeah.
I
It's
might
a
start using
thing now.
that. I'm gonna
Yeah.
start using that one. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really enjoyed it, and I think people will enjoy the topics that we've covered. I know I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about insects and water consumption, and all these organizations that I'm really excited to also research more. And I advise everyone watching this to also go look into these organizations and figure out ways to get involved for themselves.
100%. Thank you for having me. And, you know, I'm always open for any additional questions. And, you know, for any youth who wants to join all of these youth networks, I'm happy to join people through different regions around the world.
Great, that's awesome. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure. Okay,
Thank you, Theodora.
bye.
Bye.